It was a test, not a launch, just a test. A routine simulation on a launch pad with 3 of America's best astronauts locked inside their capsule. The goal was to prove America was ready to go to the moon, to beat the Soviets, to fulfill a president's promise. But in a single horrifying instant, that goal vanished. What happened next on January 27, 1967, wasn't just a tragedy. It was a catastrophe that should have ended the American space program. It exposed fatal flaws, arrogant oversight, and a desperate rush to win. But this is not just the story of a fire. This is the story of how that fire forged a new NASA, how the death of 3 heroes became the reason others would live, how a failure that should have ended everything is the very reason anything succeeded. This is the story of the disaster that changed everything, and it all began with the smell of sour oxygen. But before we begin, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. Senator John F. Kennedy assumed the presidency of the United States in 1960. A significant portion of his campaign had emphasized demonstrating America's superiority against the Soviet Union, particularly in the realm of space exploration. Having won the presidency, Kennedy was now expected to produce concrete outcomes. The urgency to surpass the Soviets intensified when, in 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the very first human to travel into space. That same year, President Kennedy announced a profoundly ambitious objective. The United States would land a man on the moon and bring him back to Earth safely, all before the decade's conclusion. The responsibility for determining how to accomplish this fell to NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. From 1961 to 1966, the organization worked diligently to prepare the foundation for a lunar landing. The Mercury and Gemini mission series evaluated the human body's response to space, refined technical procedures, and successfully launched multiple 1- and 2-person space flights. By the start of 1967, NASA's Apollo program was preparing for its first mission with a crew. At this juncture, only 3 years remained to meet President Kennedy's deadline. This mission, originally designated Apollo Saturn 204 but later known as Apollo 1, was planned to orbit the Earth. Its crew was to consist of 3 NASA astronauts, Commander Virgil Gus Grissom, Senior Pilot Ed White, and Pilot Roger B. Chaffee. Commander Gus Grissom had already distinguished himself as the second American in space in 1960 under the earlier Mercury program, and was also the first NASA astronaut to travel to space on 2 occasions. Pilot Ed White was another veteran NASA crew member. Prior to joining the Apollo 1 project, White had performed the first American spacewalk in 1965. Apollo 1 was slated to be pilot Roger Chaffee's first assignment on a spaceflight. Nevertheless, he also possessed extensive experience from many years supporting NASA's space initiatives. The Apollo 1 spacecraft was considerably larger and more intricate than earlier models, and in the period before its scheduled launch on February 21, 1967, there were numerous setbacks and failed tests. The crew was acutely aware of these issues and even humorously acknowledged them by sending a photo of themselves praying to the mission's office manager, captioned, "It isn't that we don't trust you, Joe, but this time we've decided to go over your head." In a similar vein, when Commander Grissom was questioned during an interview about the potential for mission failure, he replied, "You sort of have to put that out of your mind. There's always a possibility that you can have a catastrophic failure. Of course, this is a risk present in every mission. It could occur on a final journey just as easily as an inaugural one. Therefore, your only course is to plan for every contingency as thoroughly as possible, ensure you have a highly skilled crew, and proceed with the flight." On the morning of January 27th, the 3 crew members headed to the launch site to conduct a standard simulated launch test. The men, fully suited in their space gear, proceeded to the tower at Launch Complex 34 and crossed the walkway to their command module. The test's initial phases were fraught with problems. At 1 p.m., the astronauts reported a strange, unpleasant odor in their oxygen supply, an issue which paused the countdown while it was examined. Ultimately, no source for the smell was identified, and the test was restarted after a delay exceeding 1 hour. Following the procedure for an actual launch, the astronauts and ground team sealed the 3-part hatch, and the cabin was pressurized. After the crew was secured inside, however, problems with the communication equipment became apparent. At 5:40 p.m., the simulated countdown was halted again to address these malfunctions. Grissom was heard remarking, "How are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between 2 or 3 buildings?"
How are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between 3 buildings? I can't hear a thing you're saying. Jesus Christ. Again? But how are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between 2 or 3 buildings?
By approximately 6:30 p.m., the countdown was still holding at T-minus 10 minutes. The crew, weary from a long day of interruptions and comms failures, were continuing with their checklists to occupy the time. Then the module underwent a sudden, brief surge in power. Seconds later, at 6:31 p.m., multiple calls reporting a fire were heard from the 3 astronauts inside. Flames and smoke from the blaze spilled out onto the launch complex as the swiftly increasing temperature and pressure inside the cabin caused the outer hull to rupture. After only 5 seconds, the crew's shouts of alarm transformed into screams of agony. Engineers observed in horror as smoke filled the command module, blocking the view from the internal cameras. Among the final scenes visible was White making a frantic effort to operate the module's intricate inner hatch mechanism. Personnel at the launch pad raced to the scene to open the hatch from the exterior, but were driven back. The thick, rolling smoke eliminated all visibility, and when rescuers equipped their breathing masks to aid them, they discovered these crucial devices were defective and did not properly filter the poisonous fumes. Due to this and the complicated nature of the hatch's locking assembly, it took rescue teams 5 agonizing minutes to gain entry to the capsule. By the time they succeeded, it was already too late. All 3 astronauts inside had perished. Once the fire was extinguished and the area fully documented, the remains of Grissom, White, and Chaffee were transported for analysis by U.S. Air Force pathologists. The cause of death for all 3 was determined to be asphyxiation. Although the burns they sustained were considered potentially survivable, the fire had generated fatal concentrations of carbon monoxide and other poisonous gases. This devastating tragedy had a profound effect on the entire Apollo program. How could a standard, low-risk test have resulted in the deaths of 3 astronauts? In the aftermath of the fire, NASA's flight director, Gene Kranz, addressed his team by stating, "We did not do our job. We were rolling the dice hoping that things would come together by launch day, when in our hearts we knew it would take a miracle. We were too overly optimistic about our timeline, and we ignored all the issues we noticed daily in our work. Every component of the program was failing, and we were as well." An investigative board chaired by the director of NASA's Langley Research Center in Virginia, Floyd L. Thompson, was formed to identify the fire's origin. After 2 months, the board published a 3,000-page report outlining its conclusions. Although a single definitive source for the fire was not pinpointed, it was concluded that damaged wiring beneath Grissom's seat was a probable ignition point. A spark from these wires within the pressurized, pure oxygen atmosphere of the command module would have ignited a fast-moving blaze. The fire is thought to have been accelerated by an excessive quantity of flammable materials used throughout the cabin's interior, such as nylon netting, foam padding, and Velcro. Beyond the fire's potential cause, the review board concluded that the 3-hatch system designed to seal the cabin was excessively complicated. The interior door required 90 seconds to open under perfect conditions, yet the Apollo 1 crew had never achieved this speed during drills. The Apollo 1 fire was a national tragedy, but from its ashes arose a new NASA, one rebuilt on a foundation of relentless safety and brutal honesty. The moon landing was their triumph, but it was built on the sacrifice of Grissom, White, and Chaffee, a sacrifice that forever changed the cost of dreaming big. It makes you wonder, could we have reached the moon without paying such a terrible price? What's your take? Was this the necessary cost of progress? Let me know in the comments.